and his topic is possibility. This is the bio that he submitted to our program guild. Franklin Abbott is a practicing poet who lives in Decatur with 2 cats. And I would add that he's a practicing philosopher who values brevity. One of his philosophical axioms that I try to remember on a bad day is don't suffer from your suffering. Franklin is a modest, soft-spoken, kind, centered gentleman with the most beautiful smile, kindest eyes, friend of us all. And I could go on, but for the sake of brevity, please welcome Franklin Abbott.
Give me a second to set up. I always try to remember to bring a bottle of water that I never need unless I forget. When I was asked to give the talk, it was, I guess it was last year, because I went away on the 15th of December and came back on the 15th of February. And things had changed a lot here. So I thought to myself, usually it's sort of easy to do a talk like this because it's an inspirational talk and, you want to say things that make people feel better. But that really feels like it would be a little bit artificial today, given what we're dealing with. But let me begin with greetings from the Existential Cafe in Chandigarh, Punjab. I have one, thank you. If I need another one, I'll let you know. Sometimes it's nice to have one to throw. But one of the things that I did on my travels in India is I went to Chandigarh, which is the capital of Punjab state, and through a friend, the cousin of my friend Kamala Dutt, who is a writer, she set up a reading there at a place called the Existential Cafe. And they had pictures of Sartre and Simone on the walls and quotations. And I said, do you know of any other existential anything anywhere? And they said, no. And I said, well, there is one in Atlanta. So now that I'm getting a little bit of energy back, I've been back a month, I will make sure that there's a connection that happens because it was a really charming place. And it was a place where people come to have philosophical, heartfelt conversations that are not particularly religious or doctrinaire. We need places like that and like this. Let me begin with a poem. Another brief aside about my travels in India. I was often, just sort of unaware of what was next. I have friends there, and my friends are wonderful people, but not all of them speak a lot of English. And sometimes I would be picked up and taken on a ride, not knowing where I was going. And I learned it was better not to worry about where I was going. I was going somewhere. And I would get there, and it would be interesting, and it would be more interesting than anything I could make up. So after driving around with this group of guys, for a few hours, I was taken to a place, and I could see that there were a lot of people assembled on a field. And it was a festival time in that part of India, in Assam, called Bihu. And during Bihu, which is sort of like New Year's, there are lots of things that go on. And the group that I was with was an indigenous group called the Boros. And the Boros were having some kind of congregation out there in the field. And I was taken, another friend of mine emerged, and he said, come down, come down, come down. And he took me down, sat me down at a table, and they gave me a scarf, which is their custom, and asked me to say something, which I don't know what I said, but I said something. And things started happening, and then my friend came back and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, now it's time for you to recite a poem. Oh, great. I'm not a memorizer. I don't have a strong recollection of even stuff that I've read many times, including this piece, and I could only remember half of it. But most of the people there did not speak English, and I felt like I just had to present it as a poem, that I had to be a poet for them, and I will read this for you as well. It's called Another Covenant. It's an old poem. Every year in spring I wait for the blue iris to send its spikes over blades of the palest green as if to penetrate heaven. I watch for a radical redirection as each indigo-tipped spear unfurls one petal at a time, and weapon becomes blossom. There is no wounding of the sky, only a cup for the wind and rain. When is an empty hand an open hand? When each finger of its own rhythm is warm to the softness of potter's clay, a hand becomes a vessel deep enough to harbor what is needed to fill a life. The space it redefines is not a void, but a promise. Thank you. So, possibilities. I gave the title to Stell, not knowing what in the world I was going to talk about, but that sounded like a good catch-all. And so I've been thinking about it. Like I say, it's been a month since I've been back. I was away for 2 months. All of my molecules got rearranged. I was like hung upside down and shaken. And I'm kind of back to myself, but I'll never be back to myself really because I'm not me anymore. One of the things that I have been hearing, in various newscasts is that this time of year is 5 years ago is when we learned about COVID. And so COVID, this time 5 years ago, we were not here. We were locked down, shut down, washing our groceries, doing all kinds of things to try to keep ourselves alive. And, for everybody in this room, that worked. We're here. But there are people who are not here. And there are people who are still dealing with the long-term effects of COVID. COVID is still with us. It's just, science was able to give us the opportunity to become more immune to it. And, the virus became less virulent. But it was really something to go through. When I was at a conference in India, I was listening to a man who was talking about a different kind of book, but his background is a war correspondent. And he was saying that he had gone into therapy because he was having, difficulties with coping in everyday life, and thinking that perhaps he had PTSD because he'd been in a lot of war zones. And his therapist told him that he didn't think he had PTSD. He thought he had a moral wound. And I had never heard the term moral wound before. but it really resonated with me that those of us who have watched terrible things, been bystanders, have somehow or another survived, that is a wound as well. And it's different than a mortal wound because one of those kills you. But being morally wounded means being hurt in a very, very core kind of way. And I think that one of the things that, has been true for us, and this was true back during the terrible days of the AIDS epidemic. AIDS is still with us as well. But there was a time where there was really no effective treatment. There was a lot of death and dying. There was a lot of collateral damage, which still doesn't get talked about. Back then it had to do with institutions and creativity and relationships that were lost. And we can think of all the opportunity that was lost during COVID, the parties we did not attend. I feel especially bad for young people who missed their graduations. For those of us who lost friends, there was not a funeral to go to. There were no memorials that were allowed. There was a huge amount of loss. And I think that, we have been unable collectively to process all of that loss. That's not a criticism. It's just an observation that is a lot to deal with. That is a lot to deal with. And it lives in us as a wound. I think that this inability to process this level of grief and loss and death may have contributed to what happened in November. Whether it was apathy that kept people away, whether they were, looking for something else and didn't want to pay attention. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that because there's nothing I can do about that in terms of what happened. But I do believe that that we as a group, as a country, as a collective, were badly wounded. We were not dealing with a lot of our woundedness, and bad things happen when you don't take care of a wound. So wound care. One of the symptoms, I think, of having a moral wound, very similar to PTSD, is an amplification of fear, that we're more frightened. And when I'm frightened, when I'm on edge, as I was last night, as probably all of us were with this big storm, every pine cone that falls on the roof, is foreboding of, the large tree that is about to, cut our house in half. Somebody can play on our fears. It's quite possible if you're fearful and you're not really conscious of being fearful or where that fear is coming from, that it can be manipulated. We willingly, go to scary movies and read Stephen King novels and go to haunted houses and those kinds of things. And I've often thought that that's a way that people can scream, because there's fear there without a real threat. And we do have many reasons to be fearful. COVID was devastating, and it's not the last virus out there. It's not like we're going to live our lives without some other something coming up. And we also have a very, very real challenge with our climate. And there's no way of getting around that. You can erase it from websites and refuse to talk about it and all of that. But, what we lived through last night, and we were lucky, that's very real. We all of us have friends in other parts of the world and other parts of the country where, there are terrible fires, hurricanes have become far more ferocious and unpredictable. You know, there's a reason to be afraid, but it's important to know that we're susceptible to that, and two, what it is we're afraid of, because then we begin to have some agency. Otherwise, fear is just hungry. You know, fear just, amplifies. And again, if somebody is trying to manipulate us, and this happens in very small ways. I used to go to this place to get my tires down on Memorial Drive, and I just went to get a tire, And I would pick up my car and got my tire, and they'd go, "Oh, we heard this sound. We saw this, the light went off. There's some sort of something, and it was in the voice. There was an ominous, oh. And I thought, I can't go back to this place. I'm here to get a tire. I'm not here to become terrified. And of course, whatever they were trying to scare me about was a repair that I probably did not need right that very moment. And I refuse to go to, auto repair shops or doctors or anybody who does that, because I've got enough voices in my head. I don't need to add to any of those voices. So I think, it's very important to know that we're wounded. It's very important to know that part of that wounding is that we carry more apprehension. I mean, we're here because we were on tenterhooks for several years. I was really, really careful and really, really lucky. And I would say the same thing about going through AIDS. I was really, really careful and really, really lucky. And there were plenty of people who were really, really careful who weren't so lucky. So it's not a condemnation of the way the coin flips. So Marcia was talking about something interesting earlier. I think this will come up again and again as I talk to friends about, I've got to give this talk, and I don't know how to be helpful. I want to be helpful. One of the things that I think is on all of our minds is, how do we regain power? Because when we are fearful and when there is chaos going on, it is hard to feel powerful. And one of my friends who's a therapist, I used to be one, I'm not anymore. I got to retire. That was self-care. He said, he thought of self-care as resistance. And I truly believe that the stronger I am, the more capable I am of standing up and addressing what it is, in front of me that I can address. And if I knew, that COVID was coming 2 or 3 months before it showed up, I would have gone to the dentist. I would have renewed my passport. I would have gotten the tire from another place. There would have been a whole lot of things that I would have done to get ready so that I was not preoccupied by chaos interfering with me doing the business I need to do to take care of myself. I am very fortunate in my resources, and I am able to go to the doctor whenever I need to go to the doctor, the chiropractor, the acupuncturist, the massage therapist. I have a fleet of people who help me because I'm too lazy to do yoga. But however you do it, it's just important to take really good care of yourself so that when you are, I think times will become more challenging before they become less challenging. I think that, our climate situation is going to become increasingly challenging, and I think our political situation is going to become increasingly challenging. So the stronger we are, the better able to resist we are. Marcia mentioned something that I think is important, and my acupuncturist, Faith Russler, mentioned this too. She said, joy is resistance. And I think that is absolutely true. I remember during the last time that we had to go through this, 4 years ago, One of the things that I did on a weekly basis that I lost during COVID and I need to find again is I went and listened to music. Live music once a week was like taking a spiritual bath. I needed to bathe my spirit. And the joy that comes to me through being in nature, through live music, thank you, Alan, all of that is part of how I keep breathing, I keep moving. I am able to watch the news occasionally. I'm able to know what's going on because that's not all that's going on. That is not the only story. That is not the only story. And I think that the other thing that we have, of course, is community. That this is resistance. All of us are here. We're here together, probably in a room full of existentially oriented people. You have a lot of different ways of looking at life, different opinions, different beliefs and practices. But what brings us together is that this is a community that is healing. That there are people who smile, there are people who are glad to see us, there are people who are as odd as we are. I'm not the oddest person in the room, which was not true during high school. So I think the other thing is creative expression, which is art. Certainly, there's marvelous art here, but it's the recipe that you were talking about. It's the casserole that, was passed on to your mother that, became a family treasure. That's creativity. I experience a lot of creative expression in the kitchen. I think a lot of us do, or in the garden, or in, detailing your car. I mean, you do not have to be creating a masterpiece, of literature or art, to be in a creative place. And creativity is absolutely an antidote for fear. So again, if you knew COVID was coming, there are all kinds of things you might do to get ready. And, I really think for me, that's, I can't speak for anybody else, but I have been aware of wanting to get ready, wanting to have my ducks in as much of a row that they'll ever be in. I think another thing that we can do, and this is hard, is to begin to question your choices. Why do I do what I do? Why am I in the pattern that I'm in? When I got back from India, I was constantly pulling my phone out to find out what time it was. And if you pull out your phone to find out what time it is, there are other things on your phone, okay? And so I decided to get a watch. I haven't worn a watch in years, but I thought, I want to be able to know what time it is without engaging with this thing in my pocket that I have a love-hate relationship with. I know that there are people like me who attended women's music events back in the 80s, so they will remember a group. It was a local group called Moral Hazard, okay? This cell phone is a moral hazard. It is. It is. And I really, really, really encourage you to be careful around it. If you want to test it, talk about the vacation you want to take in Hawaii and see what shows up on your social media feed. It's a two-way street. It's paying attention to every stroke you make online. And so information is going to people that are not our friends, And so it's really important to be careful. And it's important especially to be careful if you say anything inflammatory, because we are dealing with an assault on our First Amendment rights. And I think that each of us gets to choose what we want to say, but know that you're doing it in a way that's meaningful and that's a choice, and you're not just rambling online, and then all of a sudden you've been identified. You know, we don't want trouble to come knocking at our doors. Now, we may need to make some, what John Lewis used to call good trouble, but that's my choice. I have 2 addictions that I'm working on. One is Amazon, which I became addicted to during COVID because I could get things online and I couldn't go to stores, and stores didn't have anything on their shelves. And so I don't know that I'll ever be free of Amazon, but I'm really working to begin to say I need to locate local vendors and, you know, find a way of getting what I need. I don't think it's like saying money is evil. You know, I don't think it's inherently evil to order things online, however you do it, but to be aware of it, Also, where I shop. I have a Publix addiction. And Publix is, as a corporation, gives a lot of money to people who are not our friends. And, you know, Kroger is a union shop. And so, you know, I look at, you know, those companies that have eliminated their DEI programs, you know. Delta has not. That's good for Delta. I mean, but just beginning to look at the choices that I make, the things that seem to have taken control over me, because that's going to make me feel better and stronger. You know, when I feel like, you know, I'm making a choice to support people and businesses that share my values about liberty and justice for all, that is a form of resistance. That is a form of empowerment. So each of us has to find our own way. I think Marcia mentioned that as well. There's a story about Leo Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace and was a great advocate for peace. A Russian author, you know, 100 and something years ago, and that back then Russia was one of the most autocratic places in the world, and there was a tiny, tiny wealthy class, and everyone else lived in grinding poverty. And Tolstoy saw that, and he decided, he was part of that privileged class, that he was going to give all of his money away. And he did, and it didn't change anything. And he meditated on that, and what he came to was that whatever came in front of him, whatever he saw, you know, that's where he would put, you know, his extra, you know, so that it was not a universal kind of thing, but if he saw someone who worked for him was suffering, he would go and help that person. What did they need? Their mother was sick. She needed to go to the doctor. How could he help in that way? So I think that is a very, very good way of looking at how we can be effective in the world. Is the world is going to constantly come to us. You know, there's always going to be, you know, a friend who needs a call, you know, someone who needs, you know, a pot of soup. That's part of how I can be helpful, is that I can respond to the degree that I can to what comes in front of me. I like this quote from Desmond Tutu: "Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world." And that doesn't mean that, you know, there may not be bigger things you want to do. We're missing dear Sister Lorraine Fontana this morning, and she is like the queen of demonstrations. You know, there's not a demonstration that Lorraine doesn't go to, and she's perfectly willing to be arrested and to shout out loud, and I have great admiration for that. So it's each of us has to find our path with that. And each of us has to kind of push ourselves a little bit out of our comfort zone. I have absolutely no desire to write to my Congress people. They're not personal friends, but I do. I'm not crazy about giving money to politicians, but I do. I try to find my way, and I don't know what your way is, but I know that you need a way to feel like you are doing something, so that you feel like you're participating, because it's all all of our small acts of kindness, put together, as Tutu said, that makes the world a different place. John Lewis, again, to quote him, our beloved congressman who died a couple of years ago, his motto was get in good trouble. And of course, I look back and there's Susan B. Anthony, and Martin Luther King, and, good trouble. This place was, founded as good trouble. So you could call it the first existentialist congregation of good trouble, I think. So I got to wander around a lot in India. It was sort of a combination of a pilgrimage and an adventure. And one of the place that I ended up in, the last state area that I visited, was Gujarat. And here in Atlanta, most of the Indian people that you'll meet are Gujaratis. Gujaratis they were merchant class travelers, and so many of the Indian people that have traveled here to Atlanta are from Gujarat. And so I have a friend who is the editor of Khabar magazine, and his wife has a niece who is part of an eco-travel company, small company, and I hooked up with them to see, various things in Gujarat. And so one of the things that I was taken to, which was very interesting to me, I'd seen pictures, but I'd never really been into something like this, was called a step well. And a step well is basically an excavation that goes in a spiral fashion down into the ground. And at the bottom of it is water. But because India has a volatile climate, when the monsoons come, it fills up with water. And then as, things get drier, the water goes down. But there's always water. And like a cave, it's always cool. So while the kings built the temples, the queens built the stepwells. These stepwells were all built by women. And you can imagine that women need a place to, get water, bathing, all things. So it was a community space, and the queens would decorate the stepwells. So, it wasn't just like bricks. It was like elaborate carvings of different mythological scenes as you went down, 7 or 8 rotations to the bottom. So the guide that I had, very erudite fellow, who knew lots about lots, and had taken me to the Queen's stepwell, and we were walking down, and he was having to monitor me because I'm not exactly the steadiest person on my feet, and the steps are different, and some of them are very big, and he was being very good about it, giving me the hand, and then I would get the talk about whatever it was I was seeing. And so there was an image that I saw, and he said, "Well, that's Kalki." And I said, and I knew who Kalki was. Kalki is the final manifestation of Vishnu. The Vishnu is the god in the Hindu religion who preserves the universe. Okay, and Vishnu will take form periodically when the universe gets too fucked up. So, so the last time Vishnu took form, he took form as the Buddha, and the time before that, Krishna. And so Kalki is the next one. And so I asked Aditya, I said, where is Kalki? Don't we need Kalki? Isn't it time for Kalki? And he said, well, yes, actually, Kalki is here, about 60 years old, we think, but we don't know where. And I looked it up, in Wikipedia, which knows everything about everything, and it had several different things to say, which is, this is about religion, so there's nothing exact. One of the things they said, we're going to have to wait 500,000 years for Kalki to come back. There have been other people who said that they have been Kalki, but so far nothing has been proven. And so in my fantasy about all of this, thank God for an imagination, I thought, well, if Kalki is here, maybe he is not a he, maybe he is not a she, maybe he is not a they, maybe he is they are, maybe it is an energy, and that it's not about, the grand mythology of, I have a picture of Kalki on the white horse with a sword. That's a trope that's been repeated many times. But maybe we are Kalki, that this is part of who we are. It's not an entity per se. It's not a hero on a white horse. It is, an energy that happens between people who are working on being conscious, who are working on bringing love and justice into the world. That maybe this is our job. Maybe this is who we are. Who's to say we're not? So when you look around today, maybe you're looking at Kalki, and maybe Kalki is looking at you. I want to be hopeful. I'm lucky to have that kind of disposition, that I can be hopeful. And I think some of that is having lived in a lot of privilege, that I haven't had too many dents in the car. But I also believe that the human spirit is radiant, and we are capable of healing ourselves and each other, and that we are bigger than the fears that beset us. And we need each other to remind each other that this is the power. This is the power. So, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. It's always a pleasure to be with other existentialists and to come back to a place that is so resonant with history and positive energy. So I'm sure we will all go out and make some good trouble and take care of ourselves and take care of each other. And thank you again for having me.